Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to part 2 of this podcast where we are discussing the role of platforms and how they may help asset management firms get closer to their investors and deliver a more inclusive client experience.
So we've used two terms already, democratization and decentralization. These are words now that are becoming a bit more common in financial discussions. And really, I suppose the upshot to that is that there could be a way for asset managers to maybe get over maybe that really complex, heavily intermediated ecosystem that they operate in and bring a bit more order to the chaos that Steve's just alluded to there. Julien, I know that you have a view on this, and I just wonder if you could share your thoughts.
Yeah. So, in fact, I pretty think that what we have just seen with the GameStop saga is very interesting. Why? Because as you mentioned, it's the first proof of the democratization of investing, and I'm pretty convinced that if somebody managed to set up a kind of Amazon of investing, then it will enable more and more people to invest or to be more interested in investing. But you will always have generational topics. I mean, people who are able to use laptops, and as well cultural topics. I'm French, and in France, talking about money is much more taboo than in the UK or in the US. So in France, people, when talking about investment, they usually trust their long-dated financial advisor much more than a virtual robo advisor. So this is due to the history of France and the difference between France and the UK, the UK or the US. But what I would like to highlight is that now with the GameStop story, we can see that you have a new player coming in financial markets, which is what we call a crowd of individual investors. And when putting together this crowd of individual investors is as much powerful or even much more powerful than some hedge funds, meaning that those people together are able to beat the traditional players, and in addition to that, they are much more sensitive to the psychological the psychological aspects of investing than the fundamental ones. I just explained. Financial practitioners used to say, okay, I'm a professional. I study the company, I study all the fundamental data of the company before investing. This is what I'm paid for, and this is why I am called professional. Okay, fair enough. But the crowd of individual investors are much more interested in, I would say, some trends, such for example, what happens on Tesla. Because if you speak about Tesla with traditional investors, everybody say that okay, Tesla is the valuation is crazy. When you compare the turnover divided by the number of cars sold, it's crazy. Okay, fair enough. But people are buying Tesla not because of the financial fundamental data, but because of Elon Musk. They trust Elon Musk. And you have a kind of, I would say, groupies, people who are fan, who are absolutely fan of Elon Musk, and those people, they do not care at all of the financial valuation. They do not care at all about that. And what is interesting is that the financial investors, the financial professional, they have to take into account those new people coming in. And this is why I would like to add, in addition to democratization and delocalization, I would like to add the term gamification. Gamification. People are able to play investing as they are used to do, as they are used to play video games. This is what Ross was telling. And last point is about trust. You know that when dealing with money, the notion of trust is very important. And what happened with the GameStop story is very interesting to dig. I mean, people were used to trade on Robinhood or other application, let's say Robinhood, and they used to trade through Robinhood because it's cheap or almost free. But they didn't know that Robinhood used to make a major part of its turnover thanks to selling the customer information to hedge fund. This is what they do. So in fact, Robinhood, in fact, is a kind of platform whose aim is to gather the information coming from individual investors, and they sell this information to hedge funds. Okay, and the issue was that when the platform has to face such a story like GameStop, they had to choose between the individual investors and the hedge fund, and they decided to choose the hedge fund against the individual investors. So this is the reason why, if a platform is able to create, to set up, then the notion of trust is at the center of the topics.
Fascinating. Many points that I'd like to make there, but I'm going to just focus on two, Julien, because I think you've made some very interesting points there. You've already given Ross an idea for his 6th paper, so I hope you've made a note of that, Ross. So gamification will be next. So that's really interesting. But maybe I'll just go to Steve to comment on what you've just said there, Julien, because the concept there is that some of these platforms could emerge that within the wider asset management space that then work against the retail investor on behalf of the big institutions, so the hedgies and so on. Do you have, Steve, what's your view on that? I mean, it's an interesting point that Julie is raising here.
Yeah, no, it is a very interesting point, and I think it's, you know, it's ironic that that was all happening even as GameStop was sort of being lauded as this, you know, fight for the little man. But I think ultimately, you know, it sort of goes back to this information liquidity thing. I mean, I think trust does underlie everything, and if there is something that undermines that trust, that relationship can't succeed, right? So whoever it's between, institutions and platforms or individuals and platforms. So you know, I'm not sure where it ends up. Maybe the trust, you know, trust might actually thrive the most in that sort of gamified environment, if you think about it. I mean, going back to the Twitch example, which either you or Ross raised, and the notion of fans, which Julian talked about. I mean, you know, it's not really a stretch to imagine this environment where you have managers or traders with their own groups of fans, emerging as real powerful forces in the industry, and then, you know, people sort of following people in real time as they make their trades. I mean, it's with all this emphasis on transparency and community, it seems like a natural fit to me. You know,
Yeah.
real-time interactions augmented by multiple data feeds. It just makes a lot of sense. And it's not even that new if you think about it. I mean, I traded derivatives in the early days of screen trading, and even back then, you know, a millennia ago, it seems like that the best traders were very good gamers, right? So it's, you know, to the extent that that trust is necessary, it seems like it might thrive the most in an environment where there is the most information available to both parties.
Yeah, absolutely. I could certainly see that happening. Ross, is it also, there's so much that we could talk about, because I want to bring in a point on distribution platforms in a moment, but I suppose, Ross, would it be, would you view it as being necessary for XYZ asset manager to have a community, as Steve has just been saying there could be, you know, retail investors that are following closely a particular portfolio manager, trader. You know, they have all of the ratings associated, and it's a different way of thinking about the track record and the performance. Does that only really work from a trust perspective if you also have the institutional investors as part of that platform, so that you're not getting, maybe there's no cannibalization of that retail data? Do you know what I mean? Going to the other kind of big institutions that are trading against it. Do you need to have both communities in order for a platform to truly thrive?
Well, it's interesting in that when you go back to the democratization of investing, a lot of that is because data is much more widely available and inexpensive. And especially, I think the Robinhood Reddit situation, in one respect, happened because everyone's working from home, you're working remotely, you have access to all these things while you're waiting for the next Zoom call. And some of the tools that the alts managers really had to themselves is now been made much more available to retail investors. And you know, when you think about, you know, an Amazon and, you know, how many companies they bought, do you know how much, was it 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you know, the early days of a Facebook, like, well, I'm not giving them my information, you know, I'm keeping it myself. But you had the trade-off. If I give them my information, I can get it for free. So now you think, if you had someone like Amazon, and I'm taking, you know, already have a large trusting consumer base, I've got sophisticated cloud technology, I have immense data gathering capabilities, I have access to social media, I know the films they've watched on IMDb, the songs they listen to on Alexa, I can see the pictures on Instagram. I can take all this information and crunch it to such a way that I can now deliver extraordinarily precise solutions for every persona that exists. So in one respect, you're giving up so much information to a firm like that who can aggregate and analyze the data to such an extent that could never even be dreamt of, decades ago. You're now, and when you talk about democratizing investing, you're customizing investing to a level that is helpful. It's exactly precise to where you are in your lifestyle, in your life cycle at any time. It can be changed constantly, which all of these things then we'll go back to, we'll probably have higher turnover, we'll probably have more volatility, we'll have a lot more in and out. So in some respects, you can say the platform of the future would be exactly like how a sophisticated asset manager would be right now. So one could see the difference between an institutional manager and a retail manager isn't going to be that different going forward, except for the size of the ticket.
Yeah, absolutely. That's I would like Steve to offer a thought on how as a specific example, maybe the distribution platform could come into play. And Steve, I know you've referred to this in the paper, that you suggest maybe that a distribution platform with Amazon-like features, that could be quite a big deal for managers, given that maybe investors, because of their platform experience, and whether it's Amazon, whether it's fund supermarkets like Ross referred to earlier, whether it's even when people are looking online at property, they don't really care who the estate agents are. They just want a platform that gives them the information, and they decide, which kind of properties they want to follow up and view, and it doesn't really matter who the estate agent is. It's all about the platform and giving that up-to-date information. That's how we're kind of going. Do you see that becoming applicable to how fund managers may even think about how they distribute their funds within a distribution platform, Steve, where their brand per se becomes maybe less relevant as such?
I do, and I think it's for the exact reason that Ross was just talking about right now. I mean, the ability to to customize solutions at a mass level like that is just unprecedented. And going to Amazon specifically, I mean, there's no question that retail brands have had mixed experience with them, right? A lot of them have enjoyed the additional reach and the awareness that they can get on Amazon, but some brands, luxury brands, for example, they find that they prefer traditional distribution channels to avoid what they see as a race to the bottom, right? So, are we going to see something like that in fund management? I mean, it leaves fewer places to hide, right? It's hard to compete on mystique and status. When you're on a transparent platform, you're being scrutinized and reviewed constantly. So I think there are pros and cons as far as managers are concerned, and they're just going to have to decide, whether this brave new world is where they want to compete, or whether they'd prefer to sort of do things, the old way.
And if I could just quickly stick with you for a moment, Steve, you do kind of give a few, well, 5 specifically, examples of where this platform model could be envisaged within financial services, and I wonder whether you could just refer briefly to those. One of those being, it will be the likes of the tech behemoths like Google and Amazon, who are maybe best placed. equally, it could be some of these new platforms, as Julian's referred to, such as Robinhood. But could you maybe explain briefly a couple of other examples of the type of financial institution that could be in a good position to think about this concept of the platform?
Yeah, so we laid out 5 different scenarios that where we could reasonably see a platform emerging, and I think good arguments could be made for any of them. And I'd be curious to hear sort of what Ross and Julien think. For my money, I think the best chance of an Amazon-like platform emerging from a combination of existing intermediaries, consultants, or database firms, combined with various other pieces, possibly under a private equity sort of umbrella, to result in a new purpose-built platform. A lot of the plumbing and relationships would already be in place. Still, I think the biggest challenge there would be probably culture, because even if you have a very clever team in place, envisioning this and putting all the pieces together, you still have to sort of reprogram people at all the existing firms to adapt to the kind of model that we're talking about, because it just doesn't exist very much in financial services, if we're honest. And branding is also a question mark, right? I mean, Amazon built a ubiquitous brand pretty quickly, but it also didn't have a lot of direct competition at the time. But financial services, on the other hand, is very crowded, so it's not clear whether it'd be better to build an existing brand, or to build on an existing brand rather, or to launch something brand new. And I think if you're talking about a global effort, it'd almost certainly be better to do to build something new, because things from one country might not translate very well to another.
Julien, what do you think on the examples that were laid out in the paper, and just your thoughts on what you think could be the most suitable or most likely type of institution that may embrace the platform model? And I know that you had a couple of examples as well that maybe you could refer to.
In the paper, you mentioned 5 scenarios. The first one is about a platform between banks and advisory. The second one about service providers, database, and consultants. The third one about existing asset managers. The fourth, platforms, and the fifth, tech giants. I'm pretty convinced that among the 5, it will be a game between the first one, I mean big banks. Why? Because they are already famous and their names is already connected to finance. So they have the history, they have the brand, which help them to be well known for investing, and they will be in opposition with the tech giants. Why? Because when you look at the GAFAM, so the tech giants, this is very interesting to notice that none of the GAFAM has tried yet to put a tool into the financial services industry. None. I mean, Google, neither Google nor Apple nor Microsoft, none out of them tried to investigate what they could be able to do in the financial industry. I mean, they have the data, they have the technology, they have everything, but yet they did not try. So for me, the the other players mentioned in the 5 scenarios, I mean out of the big banks and out of the tech giants, they will have to either to disappear or to be eaten by the banks or by the GAFAM. This is what you can see. I mean, when Amazon decided to develop, what did they do? They just bought. They bought back the companies that were likely to become their competitors. In your paper, you mentioned that Amazon, I think they bought something like 89 companies until 2019, so something like that, I think. So and this, in fact, those companies, this is what they do. As soon as they find out something that could be interesting for them, they have the cash, so they just pay in order to put the skills internal. So for me, these 2 scenarios, the first one with the banks, with the big banks, because of their history and the fact that they are famous for investing, and the 5th scenario with the GAFAM, for me, those 2 are the more likely.
Well, Ross, I'm going to get you to comment on that, and in both of those examples, whether it is the big banks or whether it's the FANGs, the common denominator is that they are globally recognized institutions, aren't they? People know them wherever you are. So I suppose it's the tech brand versus the bank brand, and maybe it'll be a battle between the two. What do you think, Ross?
It is interesting because obviously we put down 5 scenarios because we thought all of them were valid, but to say which one will be the winner, it's just interesting what Stephen and Julien were saying. You know, when you go back to your comments about going to an estate agent, I know I do, and a lot of my friends and peers will just go to Amazon Prime and say, oh, I'll just buy this. We don't do any price comparisons. We don't go onto lots of websites and see what the best deal is. It's, you trust the name, you trust the delivery, you know you're going to get it on time, and once you paid your $180 or whatever much a year, you get free shipping. So we're buying the brand right there. And you kind of go back to what I said earlier. You have the FANGs, you have the tech giants who can slice and dice data so much greater than ever envisioned. They have the capability. But I agree with Julien. Well, if they can do it, why haven't they? What is that impediment to stop them? We know, Amazon bought Whole Foods, and we have the 365 brand of their food stuff. So what's the average margin on the supermarket? It's like 2% or 3%. Well, in asset management, where are we? 30, 40, 50%? So if the margin is so great, what is stopping the big tech giants from doing it? Yeah, it can't be margins. Is it they don't want to deal with the regulators? Is it, do they envision competitive restrictions? Do they, is the GDPR kind of thing about too much data, and they're in control of too much of people, and now there's like an oligarchy or something going on. So I don't know why it's not happening. But then you get to the big banks, particularly in Europe, where the brand names and distribution is through banks. They have the network, they have the name recognition, they understand the financial services arena. And actually, if you listen to Jamie Dimon, the last JP Morgan analyst call, he's saying, come on, come one, come all. We have a lot of capital. We have the distribution, we have the name. We will buy you, fintech. we have the power. You have something we want, and we can engulf you and push you out, just like Amazon did with the 85, 89 different companies they bought. And so I can envision a mixture, as Steve said, the second and fourth, the consultants and the new platforms. Equally, I can see a large bank, fintech type company joining together to get the best of both worlds. So you can envision a lot of these scenarios happening, given the massive capital that's available, whether it's from the PE world or through the big, large global banks, and the Silicon Valley, the Silicon Roundabout in London, Boston. There's these two parallel universes growing up side by side, and there's a lot of places where they can join together for a 1 + 1 = 3 solution.
Yes, it could be that the bank that has the most successful, or maybe the most sophisticated M&A strategy could be the one that comes out on top here. So, acquiring lots of fintechs, amalgamating them, and in order for them to become something like an Amazon. So it could well be that it's those that are most successful at prosecuting those deals to really become something more powerful within the financial world. It could be JP Morgan, it could be anyone, but I think that's interesting that again, this is interesting stuff for people to think about. Let's just conclude.
Sorry, so James, one question. Can I ask Steve? Steve has worked in Asia a lot. Steve, what are you thinking about Alibaba and Ant Financial? How does that play into this world? What do you think your view is there?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point, because Ant Financial might be the closest thing that we've actually seen to Amazonization, right? In the flesh. And it came out of Alibaba. So Ant practically drew a map for big tech companies in the rest of the world to follow, if you think about it. And it had run-ins with the Chinese government last year, and the IPO was canceled and all of that. But I'm not sure any of that is hugely relevant. I mean, it might be instructive in the sense that you're likely to get pushback for expanding into too many areas and maybe getting too powerful, as Ross was alluding to. But still, it's it shows the way for a company like Amazon itself to go into this market. So frankly, I'm a little surprised that nobody else has actually tried to do it.
It does. I don't think anyone really has the answer. Yeah, it's interesting. Why hasn't, as Julien was saying, why have none of the FANGs really tried to pivot into financial services? I don't know. Is it a risk? The thing is, I guess it's kind of obvious, but when you start trading financial markets, you're going to lose money potentially. Do they not want to be associated with that? It's a bit different to buying a teapot on Amazon, isn't it? If you potentially lose, 50 grand, and do you know what I mean? Maybe it's a risk management thing. I don't know. You get 0-star rating because you've just lost a load of money. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, but there's some reason why they haven't pivoted into that area, right? So, but it's not to say it won't happen, and maybe Alibaba will. So it sounds like they've already, started to do that. I just wanted to conclude though, Steve. What would be then? Just wrap it up for us, Steve, and then I'll go to Julien and to Ross. But what is it fair to say that no financial institution can really overlook what's happening? The world is changing very quickly. We've seen what's happened with Robinhood and the kind of mass democratization. this is something that all financial institutions need to be thinking about, and it could be a way for them to reimagine what it really means to deliver that customer experience really to their investors.
Yeah, absolutely. Asset management is a lot more crowded and competitive than it used to be. And as far as we're concerned, every investment firm needs to decide where they want to position themselves, right? Vis-a-vis platforms. Investor expectations are rising alongside what would have once been considered radical transparency. So I guess I'd just say, whoever your client is, you want to make sure that every interaction counts.
Yeah, that's what it's. Yes, that's the key. And I think with the younger generation, that's just gonna become just so much more important. And I think we said it earlier on the podcast. This is a generational issue that we're kind of discussing here today. And Julien, your last word from you, just given that you're quite interested from your own point at Quantology in collective intelligence. So I'm sure you have a final thought on how that plays into this whole story, and whether this could be a new paradigm that we see over the next few years.
Yes. In fact, if we go ahead with this kind of platform, what will happen is that the market will be even more psychology driven than it is today. And today it's already much more psychology driven than fundamental driven. I say that because at Quantology, our know-how is to build systematic and quantitative processes based on psychological biases and cognitive biases. So what we notice in the last few years is that it's much easier to post good performances by using psychological rules than using fundamental rules. And if tomorrow the market is even more democratized, then it will increase once again the impact of the psychological aspects. And last thing I would like to highlight is what I call collective intelligence. Traditionally, financial services used to be reserved for the people who claim to have the expertise. They used to say, okay, don't touch, it's for me because I'm an expert. Okay, and what we can see after all is that the performances of those self-claimed experts can be very easily discussed. And if now the information is becoming much easier to handle for everybody, much easier to get for everybody, either the professional or the non-professional, then it means that the investors will ask a lot more to the professionals than they used to do. Why? Because then they can say, okay, you do these performances. This is what I'm able to do using the same data as you do. So what is the reason why I pay you 1% or 2% management fees per year? So this Amazonization this Amazonization of financial services will change dramatically two things: the holding period, which become a lot shorter than today, and on the second hand, it will change the relationship between the customer and the asset manager.
Again, that's a great concluding thought there, Julien, and I mean that's a cliffhanger if ever there was one. And I suppose my point on there would be, and Ross, if you want literally the last word here, this goes far beyond anyone thinking, right, I want to know how fund manager X has performed relative to his peer group. What Julien is suggesting is, I'm going to now compare you, Mr. Fund Manager, to not just myself, but potentially thousands of other investors who all have this data to hand. I mean, it's going to really put fund managers on the hook.
Yeah, in listening to Julien, I've come up with another word, the personification on top of the gamification. And in that, even it, outsourcing is commonplace today, and platforms are about integrating the best solutions available, and that's something that we do at SEI. It doesn't matter if it's an internally developed product or engine. It doesn't matter if you're contracting it from an industry best provider or APIs or something. The fact that we can, and as do a lot of other firms, integrate a lot of inputs. Our job is to give the users what they want, when they want it, how they want it, and make it much more personal and intuitive to them. And in doing that, we're actually using cold, hard technology to make a solution more empathetic. It's more understanding who you are as a user. You're turning it from one directional to buy. It's not a diatribe. It's a dialogue. And I agree with Julien that it's ideas can come from anywhere. There's no right way. And if I'm going to your point there, James, I have a portfolio and I want to compare it. I can compare it with all these other portfolio managers. I can compare it to retail, non-professional portfolio managers, or I can compare it with people who are just like me, who went to my college, who are my age, have my background. There are so many different ways to slice and dice this to make it feel personalized to me, and it's not just a number now. It becomes more integral into who I am, that fits into all of the social aspects that we so rely on now as well. So, the way that fintech and is changing financial services, the way that society is changing financial services, we're all kind of coming together to some place where everyone is influencing everyone else, and it's going to be a decade of the customer. It's going to be the decade of personification. It's going to be a decade of customized solutions.
Well, that concludes this third podcast, and many thanks to the panel for their thoughts, their insights, and really some very thought-provoking ideas shared. So many thanks indeed. We will be joining you again very soon, where our fourth installation of this 5-part podcast series will be coming.